Artificial intelligence is a double-edged technology. It has potential great impacts, potential negative impacts, and you could say that for pretty much every kind of technology. It's just that artificial intelligence is our most powerful technology, so it's particularly true. And as Simon noted, that wasn't true for most of artificial intelligence's 61-year history. There was a big bang in 2012 when Jeff Hinton and his team worked out, after 26 years of trying, how to apply a branch of statistics called machine learning, and in particular deep learning, to artificial intelligence. And since then, AI has been astonishingly powerful. As Simon said, the best AI systems can now recognize faces better than we can. And recognizing faces is a human superpower. They are overtaking us in speech recognition and catching up on us in natural language processing. So in the next few years, that's going to produce some remarkable changes. Our smartphones are going to get sexy. That's a smartphone being sexy. And of course, they will go on to be smart glasses and then eventually insidables. But there's much more coming, much more impactful things coming, and it's all driven by Moore's law. Now, there's a lot of rather silly debate about whether Moore's law has finished or whether it's changed. The fundamental truth is machines are getting twice as powerful every 18 months or so. We're getting a doubling process, and that gives you exponential growth. If you remember one thing, remember the word exponential. When you have exponential growth, you have enormous change, and whatever's happened in the past, you're always at the beginning. So I think, in the rest of this century, we're going to get two singularities. And I'm using the word singularity simply to mean the superlative of change, the biggest possible transformation you can think of. The one that's most important, which I'll talk about first, is the technological singularity, and that's when we create an artificial general intelligence, which goes on quickly to become a superintelligence. And the one that's most urgent is the economic singularity, which Simon's already referred to, which is when many of us are out of work. Now, the technological singularity, superintelligence, it just sounds like science fiction, doesn't it? It sounds like fantasy. But actually, there's two ways to do it, and at least one of them will almost certainly work. One way is we carry on developing the AI systems we have now, and we don't know how long that would take. We don't know for sure that it would work, but it probably will. The other way almost certainly will, and that is to reverse engineer a human brain, and that's called whole brain emulation. And the best guess is that that would take 50 to 70 years. Now, the Skynet scenario, where a large computer system becomes self-aware and takes a look at humanity through Wikipedia and so on, and decides we're a pretty bad thing and to wipe us out, isn't impossible, but we'd have to be very stupid and very unlucky to get that one. The real problem is error, not terror. The real problem is we create a formidably competent machine or system, and we simply ask it the wrong question, like King Midas did when he asked his local version of a superintelligence, which was a Greek god, to make everything that he touched turn to gold, and that didn't work out so well. So there are some serious downsides to the possibility of superintelligence, but there are also some enormous upsides. DeepMind, who I like to think of as being the SAS of deep learning, have this great two-step mission statement. Step one, solve intelligence, solve artificial general intelligence. Step two, use that to solve everything else. And by everything else, they really mean everything else. War, poverty, death. Death. This may sound a little crazy, but there are probably people in this room who have grandchildren who may not have to die if we make the transition to superintelligence successfully. One thing's for sure is we can't stop this. Relinquishment is not an option. Firstly, we wouldn't know what branches of research to stop, but more importantly, having a better AI than your competitor is increasingly the way you win. Whether you're a company, a government, or a military, having a less good AI is not an option. And there's a huge amount of money going into the development of AI. These 6 companies between them, they spend more on R&D than the UK does. That's all of the UK's universities, companies, and government. And there are 3 tech giants in China who are also relentlessly now focused on AI. And here's the list of great European tech giants who are focused on AI. And I think, frankly, this is a problem. Humanity's biggest challenge this century, and quite possibly ever, is to make sure that the first superintelligence really, really likes humans and understands us better than we do ourselves. And the good news is that there are some people working on it. There are 4 existential risk organizations, 2 in the States, 2 in the UK, working on that problem, and it's a big problem, but we've got probably 50 years to solve it. So I'm reasonably optimistic, and I would give the technological singularity an amber signal on the traffic light system. What about the economic singularity? This is automation, and we've had automation since before the Industrial Revolution. So in agriculture, in 1800, 80% of all Americans who worked on farms. In 1900, that number was down to 40%, and now it's down about 1%. And in the long run, for the humans, that wasn't a terrible problem, because the humans' muscle power jobs got replaced by the machines, but we had something else to offer. We had our cognitive abilities. But it didn't work out so well for the horse. 1915 was peak horse, with 21.5 million working on American farms, and now there are none. And so the American horse population fell to about 2 million. And I'm sad to say that most of those missing horses, their final job was to be dog food. In 2013, a couple of Oxford academics wrote a report that got a lot of people talking, in which they said that within 20 years, about half of all American jobs could be automated. The canary in the coal mine, and Simon's already referred to this, is self-driving vehicles. These are going to take off quite quickly as soon as they are fully ready for prime time. In other words, as soon as you don't need a steering wheel and pedals in the car. Best guess is that's about 7 years from now. And where they'll take off very fast is in the commercial sector, because a human driver contributes a quarter to a half of the cost of the vehicle. So any fleet owner will have to adopt this technology. At the same time as all those drivers are being laid off, doctors, and Simon has already referred to this, are going to find themselves under attack from machines. Lawyers are already finding that lots of the discovery and disclosure process is being automated. There are thousands of newspaper articles published every day, written by machines. And in factories and warehouses, machines are getting cheaper and easier to instruct and much safer to be around. So it doesn't matter if you're blue collar or if you're white collar. The AI is colorblind. Now, this is probably a minority opinion. I was delighted to discover that Simon thinks it, and I think Simon and I are going to be working together. But most people, I think, at the moment, certainly most of the leadership of the tech giants, believe this is the Luddite fallacy. And that argument goes like this. We've had automation in the past, it didn't cause lasting widespread unemployment, and therefore it won't in the future. And when you state it that boldly, it's patently daft. Just because something hasn't happened in the past doesn't mean to say it can't happen in the future. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to fly. It's also not true, as the horses would tell you if they weren't sitting inside dog food cans. So the Luddite fallacy argument that it can't happen is silly, but what about the examples of how we might keep working in this new world where machines are automating cognitive work? One argument is that we work in tandem with them, but the trouble is that, unlike us, the machines are getting twice as good every 18 months. Bear in mind exponential growth. The exponential growth means that in 10 years' time, the machines we have will be 128 times smarter than the ones that we have now. In 20 years' time, they'll be 8,000 times smarter. And in 30 years' time, they'll be 1,000,000 times smarter. So when Google's chairman, Eric Schmidt, says he's a job elimination denier, he is not bearing in mind exponential growth. So then they say that we'll all do the caring jobs that machines can't, because machines aren't conscious. At least we profoundly believe they're not, and let's hope they're not. And therefore they can't have empathy, and they can't do caring jobs. Well, it turns out that's not true. In Japan, elderly people are increasingly being looked after by robots, and they like it, because they can tell a robot the same joke 1,000,000 times a day, and the robot really doesn't care. The last line of defense is we open the magic job drawer, and all these new jobs fly out, and we can't tell you what they are now because the technologies that enable them don't yet exist. Well, it might happen. It's a slim chance to gamble so much on, and it isn't what happened in the past. Most people today are doing jobs that existed in 1900. We haven't actually created a great many new jobs. So I think, as Simon thinks, that we have to bite the bullet. We have to accept that in a generation or so, a great many people, I think probably a majority, will be unemployable. And our job is to make sure that is a really good thing, which it can be. Because a world in which machines do all the jobs and humans get on with the important business of life, which is learning and play and exploring and having fun, that's a great world. And that's the world we should be aiming for. But there are some challenges. A lot of people think the biggest challenge will be meaning. What on earth will we all do if we don't have jobs? How will we find meaning in our lives? Well, I'm sorry, but I don't think that being an Amazon delivery driver, and I apologize if there are any in the room, I don't think that being an Amazon delivery driver gives you very much meaning. And possibly not even being an actuary. Again, apologies to actuaries. I think there are two classes of people who show that you don't have to have a job to have meaning. One is comfortably off-retired people, and the other is aristocrats. No jobs, no lack of meaning. The real problem is this: income. If you have no jobs but you have income, you can have meaning, but if you have no income, you're in a bad position. So how do we get enough income to all the people who won't be working? Simon thinks the answer is universal basic income. I think he's wrong, and I look forward to discussing this with him. I think he's wrong because all the ways that people propose to pay for it won't work. And more importantly than that, it's basic. If the best we can do when, say, half of the population is not working is to give them a basic income, then we have failed, morally and socially, because I don't think that society will survive very long. I think the solution is to drive down the price, the cost of all the goods and services that you need for a very good life to close to zero. Not zero, because we want to keep the market economy. It's a very powerful mechanism for resource allocation. But close to zero, so that the mechanisms for paying for people to enjoy it wouldn't be too onerous on those who are still working and those who have assets. And I think this is an urgent problem, because I think in about 10 years' time there's going to be a panic. The panic is going to happen when everybody sees self-driving vehicles running around and realizes that it's not just the drivers who are going to be out of work forever, it's many of us. And before that panic arrives, we need a plan. I think we should lock up some economists, some technologists, some science fiction writers, some philosophers, some psychologists in a room and not let them out until they've worked out what is the best solution to the economic singularity and how to get from here to there. And I think that should be happening all over the world. I think we need a lot of think tanks. Now, I give versions of this talk quite often, and most of these slides I've used before. The next slide I have never used before, and I'm pretty sure I'll never use it again. And anybody else in the room who's a Monty Python fan can share my childish joy in saying, there is no time to lose. That's the room full of science fiction writers and economists. Now, I could be quite wrong about this. Simon and I could be quite wrong. Maybe Eric Schmidt's right. Maybe we will all still have jobs in 30, 50 years. If we are wrong, and we make this investment in a few think tanks around the world, we'll probably waste a few million quid. And frankly, who cares? But what if we're right? What if, in 10 years' time, there is a panic coming which will deliver something a great deal worse than President Pinocchio? What if the populist government that we get in 10 years' time, when everybody is terrified and there is no plan, is a fascist government, which I think is entirely possible? I think the economic singularity gets a red light because, although it's not an existential threat in the way that the technological singularity is, it's coming quite soon, and we're not preparing for it. Artificial intelligence is a double-edged technology. It can have great outcomes. It can have terrible outcomes. We're on an exponential growth path. We can have a wonderful future, and we really should. We deserve it. And if we work hard, and perhaps if we're a bit lucky, we can get a wonderful future. We have to face the challenges that stand between us and that. Thank you.